And we're live.
This is Plant Daddy Podcast, serving you intersectional horticulture. I'm Matthew.
And I'm Steven. Hey everyone, we're back with another Minisode focused on a single trending plant that we're excited about right now. Today we're going to talk about Begonia maculata.
Yes.
So Matthew, what is it and why is it interesting?
So this is a really beautiful begonia that is fairly easy to grow. You'll be able to recognize it because it's very similar to begonias that you are already familiar with, but it has really deep, like kind of emerald olive green leaves with large silvery glistening spots on it. The backside of the leaves are like a burgundy red, so they give beautiful contrast, and they have beautiful white flowers.
Yeah, it's kind of a big triangular shape, right? Like these are kind of large looking leaves. Right?
Yeah, they're actually quite long. So
Okay.
it's like a traditional angel wing begonia shape, but a little bit elevated.
So I've seen this all over social media for a while, but I kind of assumed it was like growing a Rex begonia. In my mind, that means it requires a lot of light for the leaves to color up nicely. Droops when it's thirsty. Probably requires a dormancy at some point. It's kind of high maintenance like that. So I guess for me, it didn't really feel worth it, maybe versus other plants I could grow. But Matthew, is this right?
It's not quite the same. There are different varieties of begonias that are grouped by their root structure. So the Rex begonia happens to be an example of a rhizomaceous one, and they grow with a
Okay.
rhizome that creeps along the soil surface. Their leaves are held up above it. They're very colorful, but the problems with this plant are that they love high humidity, but that makes them susceptible to lots of diseases indoors. They like to dry out between waterings, but if they dry out too much, then they go dormant or die.
Yeah, the Rex that I have, it just kind of looks small and sad the minute I moved it away from like the light and treating it perfectly and it being my new plant and getting all the attention.
Yeah, these are beautiful, but they are not easy indoor plants, and I think that you'd probably have good success if you had a greenhouse or a
Okay.
terrarium.
So maculata is different.
Yes, this
Okay,
is one of the
great.
fibrous rooted ones, which means that it doesn't have some kind of underground storage. And instead of having a rhizome that creeps on the surface, it's a stem that grows upright. So you also hear them called cane begonias because they kind of look like leaves on a cane,
Okay.
kind of bamboo like. But this is a pretty dependable plant because it is not as picky about all the conditions that make the other begonias tricky, and it doesn't have a firm, hard dormancy
Okay, well, that
period.
is very good news. So when did you start growing this plant?
I saw it first on Pinterest a few years ago, and gorgeous plant, stole my heart. So I
Oh,
started looking for them available. I ordered one from Logis, and in fact, I actually had to get onto a wait list so that they would notify me when they had them back in stock because they're extremely popular. So I got the plant maybe a year and a half ago, and basically I just potted it up like any other begonia in a rich but well draining soil. There was quite a bit of compost and perlite and sand in there for drainage and for nutrients and moisture retention. And it was basically difficult to get started, but easy once it was acclimated to my space.
so get started like figuring out the right place for it and the right soil and watering. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think that my soil was good. I think that was fine. I was aware that it wanted to dry slightly between waterings, but it didn't
Mm-hmm.
want to get bone dry regularly. And that was fine, but I put it in a few different spots with varying light levels, and the plant just didn't seem to thrive at first. It dropped a lot of the original leaves. Some of the canes began to kind of die off from the tips, and they'd kind of like reach a node and then just break off at that point.
Hmm.
I almost was willing to throw in my towel and say like, well, at least I tried it.
Oh,
But I just put it on a east-facing windowsill and was patient with it, and it sprouted back pretty readily from the canes that were left above the soil, and it also started growing some new ones from the root system. So I think that really what was happening was the plant just had some shock from shipping and transport, and as soon as it figured out like the stable environment that I have, I think that it was able to just flourish. So from that point on, it grew multiple canes pretty tall. It was only in like a 4 or 6 inch pot. So it's kind of already filled its pot. And I pruned it back a few times already because it does have a tendency to get tall quickly.
Okay, so it sounds like it gets home, maybe to your home when you order it. It might feel a bit of shock or something. It might react to that. So maybe people should expect that. Are there any other ways that people are growing it
You
that you
know,
know of?
I have not seen anybody really growing this plant in any means other than just like a traditional potted house plant. You could probably do them as a kodama ball,
Okay.
where you just kind of wrap the root system in moss and water it occasionally. But it's going to need pretty regular water because they don't want to dry out a ton. And they also may become top heavy at that point. Because they are inclined to get quite tall and they'll require some staking if you don't clip them back regularly to encourage bushier lower growth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I would probably stick with growing this in a pot. I'm sure that you could find other ways to do it, but to me, it just wouldn't really be worth it. I think that the plant looks fantastic in a pot, and it's very happy that way.
Okay. Any dormancy for these?
Well, I think that what I was just describing about it coming home and like being in shock and sulking for a while was probably dormancy. A lot of these plants from the tropics are going to have seasons where they're growing really well, and then they're going to have seasons where they slow down a bit.
Okay.
And so when the plant slows down, you might see some loss of foliage, you might see some browning in areas, and it might not be replacing what it's losing. But if you don't freak out about this and think that your plant is dying, just water it a little bit less for a while, and it should come back just fine.
Okay, great. So any particular challenges or frustrations? I guess you've mentioned a few there, but I mean, are these prone to bugs? Is this something where, the plant is dying, but you don't know it yet? Anything to watch out for?
Well, if my plant is dying, I don't know it yet.
Okay. But you are years in,
Yeah,
right? So,
it's been happy and reliable for me, and I have actually been growing it in a fairly dim place. Like it's not terribly bright. It's on my dining room table, so it gets some like ambient light from the sliding glass door onto my balcony. But I have grow lights hanging over it. They're not very strong and they're not terribly bright.
okay.
But it's like totally happy. The problems that I think people will have with this plant is that it's a little bit brittle and the foliage is very tender, so it's
Okay.
easy to damage. And if you have it near something like a sago palm or euphorbias with spines, you'll ruin the foliage if you're not careful with it.
Okay, but you are saying that it will get great color and the foliage without bright light.
Yeah, in
Okay,
fact, I
that's
haven't
great.
noticed any difference in what the leaves look like depending on the light levels I've tried. And I've put it in like an unobstructed east window, and I've also had it under like kind of medium grow lights like it is now. And when they grow in, they're actually kind of like a bronzy, lighter green. They're really nice. The older foliage darkens to their mature green just fine. I haven't noticed any difference in the distribution or patterning or quality of the spots. Something that's a little bit bizarre is that when the new leaves come out, they look really crumpled and disfigured. Like, oh my gosh, all these brand new leaves that it's putting out are going to be so ugly. What am I doing wrong? Nothing. Like, you just kind of wait a minute and
Huh.
the plant will like unfurl them and they'll look normal and flat and totally fine. But it is a little bit weird how they appear when they're just coming out of their
Oh,
kind
that's
of growth
interesting.
point.
Okay.
Yeah, I was a little worried about that at first, but then I realized that, well, the rest of the plant looks great, even if the growing tips are a little funky. So clearly, like, they're maturing nicely.
Okay, so should we expect this to flower easily?
Well, I've not had mine flower yet, and that's fine.
Okay.
I'm mostly growing it for its
So it's a
foliage.
foliage plant. All right.
Yeah, like, this is a plant that if it doesn't bloom for you, you'll still find it rewarding and you'll still enjoy it. And it's going to be a really beautiful statement piece among your potted plant collection. If it blooms, that's just a great benefit. I think that these are probably plants that like a little bit more light than I have been giving it to get the blooming to happen regularly. I also don't fertilize it too regularly because it's in a fairly small pot for the size of the plant that it's become, and I don't want to like overexert or tax it. And I'm kind of on this mode of if it's working, don't change it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that as I have started to propagate it, I might try a couple of different approaches and see other things that work and maybe some things that work better than what I'm currently doing. But I have no complaints about that right now.
Okay, so I sometimes hear Begonia maculata Wightii also mentioned. Is this synonymous here? Is that do people always mean that variety or?
Well, I think that if you're going to search Begonia maculata on the internet, you're almost only going to hear about Begonia maculata Wightii. And that is a specific cultivar of this species. It's endemic to Brazil. It's not a hybridized cultivated plant with like multiple parents. It is instead just kind of like a mutation of the type species.
Hmm.
I don't really know if there's a ton of difference between them, but from what I've seen in pictures of both like the type species and the select cultivar, the original one, the leaves are maybe a little bit like brighter of a green,
Okay.
less olive, less dark. The spots might be a little smaller and they might be more numerous, but it's kind of a very minute difference when you're just glancing at it.
Okay.
The biggest difference, though, is that Wightii has white flowers, and they're born in panicles, which is like a cluster of many flowers. The flowers will either be male or female, which is kind of neat.
Okay, yeah.
And basically, like the original species, they're pink, which is nice and fine, I guess. But I prefer white flowers over any other color. And so, against the really beautiful foliage, I think that it's extremely striking in a way that the pink ones just don't do it for me.
Okay, so if you had a choice, you would pick Whitey, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
Okay, would you pay more for it?
Um,
Do you think it's like that? Like, oh,
I would. I don't know if the average home grower should necessarily
okay,
worry
yeah.
about that. And I think that you're also going to have a hard enough time finding the pink species that it's probably not worth your trouble. If you
Hmm.
like pink flowers, great. Look for the original species that's not the select Whitey cultivar. But to me, I feel like the green and red leaves and the pink flowers, it's just a little bit too much. It's like one more element that the plant doesn't need to be a beautiful houseplant.
Okay. So why do we think this is trending? I would say it's sort of aroid-esque in some ways, but it's not an aroid. It's like a huge leafy kind of green plant, right? The spots are
Yeah,
really interesting and cool. And I have not grown this. I'm not particularly an aroid person. This is
nor are you a begonia
dirty
person.
secret. Yeah, but I would say it's still a really appealing plant. I don't feel like I see that type of green. I mean, this may be Instagram filtering, right? But that kind of depth of green
Well, the
in
nice thing
those
is that
spots
it's
very
not
often.
just the Instagram filtering. That's what that plant looks like on my dining room
I have
table.
seen it in his house, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really striking plant, and I think that that's why it's popular. I think it's a little bit new and unique in the begonia world because we're all familiar with the angel wing begonia. Before we sat down to record, I was talking about how the best grown angel wing begonias all seem to be in like Thai and Vietnamese restaurant windows. And these plants are just massive and they're just like leaning up against the glass and like pressing new leaves
Mhm.
into it, trying to get light. And they just seem to thrive. And if you're a pho restaurant with this plant in your window, you're obviously like focused on your restaurant rather than like keeping a greenhouse of plants alive. So that's probably like a really great indication that
But
these are reliable.
yeah, so this plant is here to stay, then we would say, right? Like to me, in my
Yeah.
mind, I feel like I've seen this for a while.
Well, you've seen similar begonias. There
Okay.
are a lot of angel wing begonias, the cane varieties, the
Yeah.
the fibrous rooted ones that are very close to this. I have another begonia that also has the silvery white spotted leaves, the same leaf shape, the same growth habit, but the leaves are just straight apple green. They're also lovely. It has pink flowers. It's like a cultivar called honeysuckle, I believe. They're
Hmm.
supposed to be fragrant, but they're not. So thanks, Logies, for lying to me on that one.
Gosh,
JK.
we build Logis up and then we tear it down all in
Well,
one episode.
when I go to their page that says fragrant plants and I order begonia off of the fragrant plants list, I expect it to have some fragrance, and this one
Oh,
sadly does not. But I might find that if I grew it in a greenhouse with high humidity and like good
yeah.
light, that might be different.
So how available is this if you're trying to find one?
Well, I have seen two of these plants in real life to purchase. One of
Hmm.
them was at the plant store down in White Center that our friend owns.
Uh-huh.
The other one was at the plant swap that he hosted. There was some plant vendor who brought one.
Oh gosh, so that's actually less common than I thought. I thought I
Yeah,
could just go to, City People's or some places around me and see this.
I have never seen one in a garden store that like isn't Miles's shop, and he only even had one, and it was purchased immediately because it's a really covetable plant. Now, I will say that perhaps part of the appeal is that it is unusual, and that when you like go into somebody's home and you see one, if you're a plant lover, you'll immediately identify and be like, "Oh, you have a Begonia maculata?"
Okay, well, you know how to sell it to me.
Does that mean that you want one now?
I do want one now.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, so
So-
I've got some propagating, so I think you're gonna have one.
Ooh, all right.
But I do want to mention they are easy to propagate. This is a plant that you can just cut the stems back when they get too tall, clean up some of the lower leaves so that you have some exposed nodes. Throw them in a glass of water. Keep the water clean, like wash the glass occasionally so that you don't have like buildup of gross or anything. But then they'll just like grow roots, and I find it useful to keep it in a warm spot so that they are more encouraged to grow roots than if you just put it in cold water. And you should see some roots appear within the next week or two. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer than that. What I do is when I prune my plant back, I just prepare every bit of cut off tissue as a cutting, and I throw them all in a glass of water, put them in the same spot that I was sprouting my Stephania erecta on top of a terrarium light setup. And then I just pot those individual cuttings when the roots are a few inches long. I keep them pretty moist, like almost soggy, until I
Okay.
can tell that the roots are established and happy, and it starts to grow new foliage. So I've given out a few of these plants to friends.
And you've promised one to me on air.
Yeah,
Okay.
so
and our tens of
Stephen will
listeners
call
are
me for
they're
it.
going to follow up.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So
yeah.
these sound, relatively easy to grow, relatively easy to propagate, impactful. You might get flowers as well. Bonus. Do you enjoy growing these?
Yeah, I've actually been really surprised. Conceptually, I love begonias. I'm a big fan of the begonia family. The problem that I have with a lot of them is that they either become humongous or they often need too much humidity. Many of them require terrariums to grow nicely.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah, like there's a lot of them that are like pretty picky. And I think that the ones that are very easy tend to be kind of bland, boring plants. And everyone's aunt has an angel wing begonia in the corner of her living room, basically. So this is like that, but elevated. It's like a little bit more special. It's hard to come by. You have to get on waiting lists when online nurseries sell out. I've had a lot of people ask me about the availability of them. So it's definitely a plant that if you're interested in, I would recommend finding a way to get your hands on one.
Okay. I think it is a little bit clear from this discussion that I am slightly begonia blind, maybe. But really, begonias in terrariums? I feel like I have to search that. Like, would a Rex begonia be easier in a terrarium next
Yes.
time? Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
I learned something. Okay, I think that's it. As always, you can find us on social media, Plant Daddy Podcast, basically everywhere. Get in touch with emails if you have questions or comments. Follow us on Instagram or ping us there.
Yeah, if there's any other plants that you would like to hear a little mini episode about, let us know, because we are always looking for, being responsive to what our listeners are interested in. We have kind of thought about talking about different succulents, different leafy tropicals, the difference between really common classic favorite houseplants versus like rare and exotic ones that are hard to find and very covetable. So let us know what you want, and we will provide it.
Yeah, and we are always interested in justifying plant purchases, saying we are doing research. We need to do this for our listenership. Okay, so please enable us.
Yeah, thank you.
All right,
Happy growing.
bye.